Welcome, we're meeting mid-October 2025, and to begin with, a bit of recognition. Those tuning into this channel are wise souls, looking to learn, looking to grow and evolve. Evolutionary astrology is a fast path. It is a way to increase our soul's capability to come into our potential by largely doing shadow work, which we could say is really the gist of spirituality when we really start to get into it. So this is for our deep divers. Evolutionary astrology is a Pluto-centric branch of astrology. What that means is we're interested in the majority of the iceberg beneath the water. We're shining this light like a blade into the unconscious to make what was unknown understood. I am so excited. In just about a couple weeks, I will be teaching on Pluto, the deep Pluto, the high octave Pluto, the spiritually advanced Pluto that we don't oftentimes hear about. Pluto being the fundamental force of evolution, of which it is constantly going on in the background in a slow, barely perceivable way. And then there is cataclysmic evolution, like what so many of us have been living and experiencing since 2020, to be specific. Today, Pluto stations direct at 1 degree of Aquarius. This is, in fact, the first time Pluto stations direct in the sign of Aquarius for roughly 2 centuries. This is introducing the Pluto Aquarius 2 decades to come. It's going to be 2043 to 4 that Pluto leaves Aquarius and goes into Pisces. So we're being introduced. This is a beginning of a totally new chapter that at this point, it's so new, it's so ahead of our time, it's so strange and incongruent to everything we've known before, because this is the future coming in faster and more exponentially than we ever knew was possible. This is why I termed this year a spiritual existential crisis leading us into the rocket ship's front door. I'd love to hear your comment. If you feel this year resonates, we're entering the rocket ship's front door. This is not necessarily about comfort or even about having a huge grip on life or what we're doing right now. And we'll talk about that, because that is typically culturally and societally, and in regards to our survival needs, what we have a focus on as a species. But when we really get into spiritual evolution, when we really do our shadow work, we understand that this is about going deeper than just what's on the surface. These topical conditioned expectations and obligations are the same boulders that end up limiting and oppressing our natural way of being, our uniqueness and individuality, of which I am passionate to validate. That is why I love astrology. You can tune into Rasa Leela community. Every month I offer a Q&A session, so you can get a mini reading from me each month. I also encourage you to join the EA school. You can do everything that I do and connect directly with the source code yourself. Okay, so this Pluto stationing in Aquarius, this is a big deal. Pluto's also out of bounds through November 23rd. It's intense, it's out of our control. And Pluto in Aquarius, it's like everything we thought we knew is being flipped on its head. This really is the age of anti. This really is the age of what you see is not what you necessarily get. And that's pretty intense. This is the beginning. Pluto Aquarius, Uranus also goes through Gemini the next decade roughly. Today we've got a beautiful grand trine in air between Venus and Libra, that Uranus in Gemini and Pluto in Aquarius. So we can talk about this. This is about understanding what a human is. And when I speak to wise souls, this is the knowledge that we're cultivating, the knowledge of consciousness, the knowledge of nature and how it all interconnects. It's not necessarily, gonna win a game show type of trivia that I mean. I am here to be a message delivery mailman for wise souls. Those that are really getting deep into the spiritual journey is what this astrology is for, because typically your light workers are not doing the shadow work, which again becomes the gist of spirituality. Light working oftentimes is an avoidance tactic to get away from reality. Therefore, I have to put out the call for those real souls, for the ancient souls, for those who live in the true and cannot hide or avoid or bullshit or enable other people's delusions. You are my people. I am here to validate you into your power, of which we all have a unique vantage point. We've all had unique cards dealt, and that is going to be our contribution. But man, there's some complex understanding that has not made itself into mainstream religion or spirituality, and that's the stuff we actually want to get to, where the human being connects to God. Aquarius has a lot to do with this, because this is the most genius, the most brilliant, and potentially dangerous sign. We're in danger of losing our human soul. We're in danger of moving backwards. We need to be aware of the past, process and digest it, understand it has made us into who we are, which in the advanced spirituality, we understand even the traumatic experiences we've survived is like a potter at the wheel shaping us into being who we are, our soul's potential. Even that is a part of God's design when we really get deep into it. And that is only for those who are ready. I would never say this to someone who's in the midst of a traumatic experience, like, oh yeah, embrace this, it's making you into your, that's not how we speak to those who are trauma survivors, and we need to get trauma informed. The amount of victim shaming, trauma blaming, shadow projection coming out of this toxic positivity that we're supposed to hold a cookie cutter of what a good girl or a good boy is supposed to be and do, basically running the same programs we received in kindergarten or from our parents for most people until the day they die. What is shadow work? It's about going down into those unconscious programs to bring awareness to them, which is the only way we end them. It's the only way we break free. And what I am observing since our prior solar eclipse in Virgo, and we'll get into how hugely symbolic this is, it's a trip back to the medieval era. As I said during that solar eclipse, this is taking us into the sub-age of Virgo, roughly 1,000 years ago to 1500 AD, which was a bit of a dark age in and of itself. And I'm noticing we're reflecting on this. We've all had lifetimes there. We all had to cope with these really intense prior life traumas in an age that was thoroughly two-dimensional. The dark ages is when we did not have an enlightenment. We did not have understanding of humanity or a celebration of diversity. There was a loss of all the above. Since the burning of the Library of Alexandria, humanity backtracked, and we can backtrack. Now, please, as I've been putting out there as a personal request, please do not take us actually back to the medieval era. We can reflect on these things so to become aware of what could very much be monsters beneath our bed, that when we shine a light on, it actually ends up being something completely different than what it was we feared because it was unknown. We have to shine a light on the darkness. This is what Pluto in Aquarius is bringing, this tremendous light to our species that does not yet know what a human being is. This, again, is a journey that's just beginning. Because this journey is just beginning, we can say this is a psychological crisis that is kicking off our need to reinvent Uranus, our whole means of becoming educated. Uranus and Gemini. You already see all the radical stuff that's going on with schooling in the States and places. The beginning of Uranus and Gemini is going to upset all of these technologies, communication, how you always did it before, how you got your diplomas. We have the opportunity to bring in a new awareness of what education should be, and we need to prioritize this psychology. It's really meant to be at the top of the food chain in order to preserve an order that is loving, that is healthy, that does allow for freedom and the pursuit of happiness for each and every individual, of which the patriarchy and these conditioned expectations and obligations oftentimes being handed down through the nuclear family. It's just about meeting the shoes that were placed for us to fill. How many of you had experienced this type of commodification from your mom or dad, where they designed who you were before you had the opportunity to even discover who and what you are? And I remember as a child, I would get, clothing on Christmas and everyone make fun of me because I'd be really upset, because it's like, this isn't me. You're dressing me up in your college fucking clothes. You're making me a walking billboard. You're dressing me up like a goody two shoes. Whatever it may be, we don't necessarily fit the cookie cutter. We need to celebrate what humanity actually is. That's what we have an opportunity to get to maybe 2 decades ago when this whole phase completes. And if anything, with all these UFOs and talk of aliens and, of course, 3i Atlas soon passing by, if I were to suspect higher dimensional intelligence, what they were all about, what they really love and celebrate in humanity, I would suspect is quirkiness. Where we're weird, where we're different, where we don't fit the circle, where we're outside of the circle. Yes, that feels lonely and alienating, but that is the road into our authenticity. That is the road into discovering our power and our gifts. It's about discarding those shoes that have been all lined up for us, largely for other people's advantage, with ulterior motivation and manipulation ruling most people. In evolutionary astrology, we understand that roughly 3/4 of the population is said to be in a consensus stage of evolution, which means about 75% of people don't know who they are as individuals. So they're lying to one another, copying one another, and now it's being called neurotypical. That is typical. 3 out of 4 people are not going to know who they are, so they are going to lie and copy to one another. What is horrific is the eugenics of what is being considered neurotypical being oppressively imposed on what is a natural diversity within the human species. This is what my job actually is. I validate each and every individual for who they are to the hair sliver. Extremely validating. That is the medicine I can give, by the way, because of the severe lack I have experienced thereof. This is a Chiron truth. I got it the same degree as Jupiter in Cancer, where I'm having my Jupiter return right now. Boy, I'm getting a good dose, reminding me of my own medieval past. Certainly a bit of misunderstanding. I remember when I was first getting into astrology, I watched these YouTube videos of this poor astrologer who drive house to house, because this is decades ago, doing a reading for this woman, and then the husband walks in and starts screaming at the wife and literally boots the astrologer out. That's how the consensus treats astrology. It is possibly one of the most disrespected and projected upon art forms that there is. And no greater bullshit attractors are the evolutionary astrologers, the real ones, which are the Jeffrey Green students. It's too real. When we get too real, when we get too spiritually advanced to the point where we see truth in other people, we see their shadow. Your training wheels with evolutionary astrology is training us to be seers, clairsentience, to be able to map out ours and others' consciousness. So if you can see to that degree where you're penetrating through others like they're made of glass, guess what? Most people are going to instinctually push you away because they're afraid of what they're going to learn about themselves. They will then shadow project that aspect of themselves of which they're actively avoiding onto you, and all hell results. That has made this Pluto station rather complex for me, because it is not just spiritually advanced souls, I wish there were, tuning into this channel, but people are all over the place. And we need to respect that, which has made it very difficult for me to learn how to convey these ideas that are so deep, so powerful, so ahead of their time. They would trigger most people. They would trigger most people into being afraid because of the level of critical thinking and the level of which it turns everything we knew on its head. I am therefore relieved to see that I'm not the only one holding these things, preaching these things. This is our human consciousness wrapping up loose ends of the Pisces age, and we're going into the Aquarian age one way or the other. So one of the ways everything gets flipped on its head is there is what is called the Testimony of Truth, ancient text, Hammurabi library, late 2nd century AD, which is this synthesis of all of this wisdom coming from all these different traditions, but basically takes the Garden of Eden myth and flips it on its head. This is the Gnostic Eden story, and you probably have watched cultural expressions of this through movies that have actually been made by high magicians, such as the author of V for Vendetta, he's slipping my mind. That is the Garden of Eden Gnostic myth, as well as The Matrix. This is lots of what we've been taught and understand to be the truth really turning on its head, because what was considered forbidden in the delusion of perfection is knowledge of good and evil. So if you avoid the knowledge, the discernment, the discrepancy between the good and evil beginning in yourself, we're going to be unconscious. We're going to have our soul be stunted. We will be dulled. We will be impotent. And furthermore, we will have such open, vulnerable blind spots. We are easily going to be possessed by low bar energies. Is this not the Gemini dividing that's largely being imposed upon us, encouraging all of this splitting? A part of this can be completely taken in the wrong way, in a manipulative way, like let's trigger people to fight. And on the other end, this is a real astrological transit. We're going to go through this separating, discerning. Guess what? Our whole mind depends on discernment. It depends on dividing and understanding polarity, duality. So good and evil is simply an understanding that we could reframe or rephrase in different ways. Who are you safe to be open around? Who, if you're vulnerable, will use everything against you? Because if you represent the unknown and you're introducing new and different things of such a depth and degree that it could possibly create a rejection from those that rely on this bubble for a preservation of their own identity, their own life, they're going to be threatened. They're going to be threatened to the point where the soul who's really doing the hard work, because you don't get this wisdom served to you on a silver platter, you do the shadow work, which is some of the most intense spiritual initiations that it is. And then you go into hiding because you realize most people can't tap down in that. I've been thinking a lot about Carl Jung. He was around during the discovery of Pluto. Coincidentally, he's really the father of the unconscious, really the most influential psychologist. He has a moon Pluto conjoinment himself. His whole Red Book was not published. That is his most esoteric, spiritually deep writing, which he knew he could not share because it would get him condemned. No one would take him seriously. This is again why it's a bit of a tricky time, because we want to introduce these new ideas that are so fundamentally revolutionary. Aquarius. It has the potential to shatter people's consciousness, and that's what we're largely viewing in the world these days, is it not? A lot of blue screens of death. Now, to return to the moon's nodes transiting the Virgo-Pisces polarity, which is reflecting the prior Pisces age of the last 2,000 years. And as I mentioned, these last two new moons in Virgo brought up the positive and the shadow of Virgo, the shadow of which we saw 1,000 years ago, dark age, Virgo sub-age. People felt so shameful, Garden of Eden myth, original sin. We suddenly become aware and we're naked. It's the self-blaming, and the more inwardly blaming, we have to avoid that blame because it's too much on the inside, because we're a light worker. We're not going to address our shadow parts. We're going to avoid them. We have to find a scapegoat to project all of that shit onto, and then all hell breaks loose. We have to be so easy. This is going to be such a critical time. We had, we've got Venus opposite to Saturn these last few days. There's a lot of these reflections coming up with others at these times, and it can be hard, it can be triggering, but it is such an informative time. We just have to accept October 2025 for what it is, an incredible month to learn and grow. And that's why I'm speaking so much to Pluto stationing direct today, because this is the real deep underbelly of what is going on. Again, everything being flipped on its head. Why? Because there's an opportunity to penetrate a new dimensional barrier here. The analogy I like to give for Uranus, Aquarius, the rocket ship, does what? Penetrates a dimensional layer, the Earth's horizon, then goes into outer space. Where are the rules the same? No, we don't have gravity the same way, right? So the boosters fall off and return to Earth, and then the spacecraft can go out there and float around and do its own thing. This is where we got the first photographs of the globe from outer space. This is an objective, higher vantage point of which we have not previously known or seen from. Sometimes that new vantage point can be so potent, so unexpected, so shocking, we don't even know what's hit us. It's like if a wrecking ball goes through the side of a prison wall when you've been in prison for decades. You don't immediately run out. You might have to go in and out a few times and pinch yourself just to know what is real and what's not real. The future hits us before we know what it is. The future is weird. The future is unknown. So we enter the era of the pioneer. We enter the era of the subculture enthusiast, which is largely going to get birthed out of the oppression, like a loaded spring, like a slingshot, the death of the human heart, the death of humanity, this machine consciousness we're being encouraged to merge with. Hopefully will slingshot us in the opposite direction, and recognizing that is at the lowest level of the food chain. That's why we do need to acknowledge that there are hierarchies. It's not about better or worse. It's about understanding how to honor our soul to come into what's going to bring us into our greatest fruition. When we really are in our soul's truth, regardless of whatever stage of evolution we're in, we can be so heart-centered, we can be so productive, we can help this whole humanity out in the way that we've had these cards dealt. So this is more about understanding dynamics than it being entirely personal, but I am observing so many personal dramas leading to choices that are actually quite fundamentally important. And so I've been thinking long and hard how to even word these things, because this is going to require a new language. Much of what I'm trying to articulate, I'm using a lot of Eastern words and terminology in my recent shares because we don't have the understanding of these things. Like I mentioned, to cut to the chase, one of the greatest diseases of our current time is this toxic positivity, which is really coming out of colonizer mentality, where you've got this Christian belief system bled with the revolutionary ideals of America. Yes, this is America's Pluto return, so we're looking all the way back to the founding of America. And there's obvious contradictions that are there, right? We have slaves, we have this hierarchy, but we also are trying to honor intellectualism, prioritizing freedom and liberty and justice for all, which we could say, man, I wish we had more of those intellectuals, because there is almost an anti-intellectualism that's sweeping this planet. Really watch out for that one in the spiritual New Age realms, because that anti-intellectualism, toxic positivity breeds the worst forms of abuse. Again, this is where people get incredibly perverted, incredibly possessed by the very shadow they are actively avoiding or projecting onto others, and everybody ends up getting taken down. So we have to be very careful and wary of all these parts and pieces. So some terminology I think that we can all understand and relate to via this choice. And it's not easy, because we're seeing these medieval fears that are quite two-dimensional. And what was going on in the medieval age? Well, there was all of this fear of demonic possession, while humans were in a surf-level caveman stupidity? Do you think that that lack of knowledge, lack of awareness of nature, lack of understanding the human consciousness could have anything to do with the widespread fears of demons, aka the unknown, aka the other? And are we not seeing so much of this in the world? Shadow Virgo can be the self-masochistic cat of nine tails because I'm not good enough. Shadow Virgo is also intolerance. We will not deal with this type of person or this type of person or this type of person. Are we assessing that superficially? Are we judging the book by the cover? Because this is, again, where some of the greatest crimes, bullshit, and manipulation is taking place. We've been conditioned to see toxic positivity as spiritual advancement when it is really more encouraging delusion, which is the antithesis of progress, evolution, and or healing. This channel is all about healing. We're wanting to do our shadow work. These are souls getting into a more complex understanding of reality, which means we're not in such a 2D view of things where we say, all this or all that. I'm either a good guy or a bad guy, so I have to be a good guy. So you're definitely the bad guy. You're actually validating to me that I'm a good guy by me handing you the shoes to fill of being the bad guy. How much are you observing that going out in the world? Is that not the same consciousness of these colonizing crusaders that were monocropping the world with a singular religion in the Pisces age, which was Christianity? And did that really help us to cut off all of these limbs of knowledge and wisdom and to say, no, we should all be footing the singular cookie cutter? So this is the point. A lot of lead up to it. The language that I feel like we can all relate to is the choices between, do we want to regress into this 2D consciousness where it's like flat earth? And it really does feel two-dimensional. We can get lost in that consciousness where we can only live in the superficial. This is, again, the consensus that is saying it's neurotypical to lie and bullshit one another, when this is actually just a copping out of the whole reason we take this life, fall in love with other people, and form relationships in the first place. So again, in this analogy of the Gnostic Garden of Eden myth, knowledge of good and evil developing in an ever-increasing way is the same as the loving path. Let us no longer be confused that knowledge is separate from goodness or love. They are absolutely interconnected. I'm not talking about Jeopardy knowledge. I'm talking about the true knowledge of nature, life, and humanity. This means that it's going to go beyond the good guy, bad guy narrative, and through a much more deeper, evolved understanding of this complexity, we will be able to help one another as human beings. But man, we got the whole trip ahead of us. This is just beginning here. So souls that are going to be stepping into this complexity are actually those that are both courageous enough to step into the unknown of that which we are, and humble enough to do the shadow work because we're not fearful and have to pretend that we're already on team good guy, already saved, already going to heaven. And man, there's a lot of people that are just so determined to be that way, but that level of entitlement leads to fall down. We need to have this balance so that way we're humble enough to go through the eye of a needle. Because the rich man thing is an analogy to all this stuff we're attached to that clutters what it is we're here to do. Here's a Pluto truth. Condition, expectation, obligation. You're supposed to have a family. You're supposed to have 2.5 kids. You're supposed to have a well-paying job. You're supposed to leave enough money for your children so they can go to college and get rubber stamped and pass on the legacy, which should hopefully be reflected in a big statue on your grave to mark how successful you've been, how much you've accomplished, and how much you've accumulated. What is that? Colonizer mentality. That's not what life is about. That's why I personally don't give a shit about all these judgments that get projected onto me constantly. Oh, you're not professional enough. Oh, why don't you dress up in that? Because it's bullshit. And I basically can't. There's a level of authenticity that forces me into hiding and putting on sunglasses and not looking at people in the eyes because they're so afraid to have reality. reflected back. I need to go into hiding. So those that are stepping into 4D, 5D, which is the new language, we're getting into what it means to be a human being. It's going to be a trip. It's going to get complex. And essentially, to summarize, the good guy, bad guy dynamic with good and evil, it still exists in a certain way, but it is no longer shadow work. Once we've integrated the shadow, we integrate a very intimate, profound relationship between the shadow and the light that is no longer work. It's much more mystical, much more magical, much more of an unfolding, a dance, an honoring, and that keeps the shadow from, this is the difference between someone who can spread love and compassion through the world versus taking over the world. This is what the Buddha was told as a young child. An astrologer said, you could either take over the whole world or you could be one of the greatest spiritual masters of our time. Don't we see the interrelationship between the shadow, the gold? It has to be this way. And as we spiritually evolve, it actually gets more intense. This is stuff I'm going to write about because, boy, I see people just entering into spiritual consciousness are trying to delude themselves. It's like, oh, a shadow. No, that can't be. Oh, no, God's always perfect. So we just block out everything else. And what we're actually blocking out is our opportunity to get in contact with God, to have love in a powerful way instead of demonizing our power or our ability to influence one another. Could we influence one another in inspiring ways? Yes, by losing the cookie cutter and by validating each person in a way that honors their individuality, their soul. Therefore, when I give readings, there can't be anything uncomfortable from the other person. There has to be tremendous emotional validation as they hear someone they're meeting for the first time explain these very nebulous dynamics in a way that validates them more than maybe anyone's ever throughout their entire life. So the more we get into that complexity, we're torch bearing for sure, but that is also candle to candle what can uplift this entire species. And let's bear in mind the difference between fake fame, which is selling out to the masses, selling out to the hive mind, means you sell out to stupid. And that's the other thing. Stupid and evil yields the same result. New Aquarian understanding, goodness and knowledge, high knowledge go together. Stupidity and ignorance and evil yields the same results. We have the choice. Is it not plainly obvious? There's two teams that are really, really creating this tension just so we can wake up via this lights on, lights off contrast, which is when we have the opportunity to wake up more than any other time. This is what Aquarius is bringing in. I'm watching people choose 2D to devolve into, to go back to this medieval way of thinking. And again, the result is a disconnect from the soul, because the toxic positivity is a dehumanizing tactic to disconnect us from the soul, because what keeps us connected to our soul is our emotions. We are protected and safe so long as we are feeling through frequency, because that feeling through frequency is the spiritual discernment that knows safe from unsafe. You do not know the person until you know their shadow. People who do not know their shadow, haven't begun their shadow work, are not safe people. It is that cut and dry. So when people are going into the 2D just to kind of coast or to disassociate or to form these narratives, they create for themselves a trap of their own making, an inability to discern what is real from what is unreal. Which is why this is actually a very common phenomena for souls just entering into spirituality, of which the New Age is full, and this is the majority of people, in fact, which is why you'll meet the so-called enlightened soul, the enlightened person who's actually a narcissist, merging with everybody else, and all the codependents come and say, I want a narcissist to merge, and the codependent is just as dangerous as the narcissist, because the codependent enables and lies and covers up for the narcissist over everything, because they want to be merged into the shared delusion that the narcissist creates. The narcissist is the fog machine. So many people are lost in what's actually a pathology turning that into spirituality, that's spreading this disease. That's actually the antithesis of spirituality. It's the entitlement. It's you don't have to do anything. You're already on team good guy because you already decided who the bad people were. Is how we're guaranteed to become the face of evil sooner, faster, and more proficiently than any other path. We have to remove the log from our own eye before we can clearly see anybody else. And we certainly should not be the first to throw a stone, right? This is what the actual shadow work brings us into, an integrated understanding of what it means to be a human so we can impress and inspire others in heart-lifting, uplifting ways, as opposed to impressing others into becoming a cookie-cutter version of ourselves, which is the spreading disease of narcissism. Join this two-dimensional false reality so you can lose your soul, fall asleep into setting the bar at the lowest level. And then when we're operating in 2D consciousness, all of the shadows beneath the bed can be transformed and beings can come in and out, and we're unaware of them because we're only seeing this way, and beings can come in 3D, right? So there's your analogy. It's a lot of info, but oh my God, how else can we even begin to scratch the surface of what's going on right now? So I hope what is coming out of all of this, Virgo, despite how critical, the shame, the feeling of impurity, this is what it means to be a human. I don't even believe God is perfect because the hidden perfection and imperfection is things can consistently improve. So this is God's plan. Because we're not perfect today, there's a continuous unfolding process that the soul and God are actually doing together. And that's the level of intimacy. That's the level of union that is profoundly intimate, even romantic, because it gets more intimate to understand we have this proximity. We are evolving together. The relationship between God and human is needed both ways, therefore. So, folks, entering the Aquarian age is going to illuminate what the human being is. This is spearheading a new psychological era of which I am so excited and happy to pioneer, open the doors of, and so happy I'm not the only one doing it because there's so much to cover. So really quick summary here. We are in this melting down of the whole Pisces age, which requires this reflection on the medieval past to tie up these loose ends, these scary monsters beneath the bed, these two-dimensional fears, pathologies, delusions, making up this shit to avoid our own power, our own responsibility, our own accountability for reality. We don't decide everything in reality. There's a lot that we're not in control of. This is the year of dissolving. This is the year of chaos. And chaos is not just a negative thing. Chaos, with a capital C, is the original God of which everything is born out of. So this is a profoundly birthing time as well. Let's melt down this Pisces age by identifying all of these Virgonian pathologies, increasing this vilification of one another through this intolerance of one another, fear of our brothers and sisters, largely through superficial assessment. Again, it's literally my face and my eyes which gets me in the most trouble. I spend most of my life validating other souls in exchange for their severe invalidation sometimes. And man, that can get frustrating. So God bless those who are also tuning in to my community, my school, the Q&As, because in your receiving, you're also validating that this is not just meant for me. Let's learn how to access the source code directly. What could be more useful than having that direct connection with God? This in and of itself is what we're not supposed to have via the priestly class in the patriarchal Pisces age, attempting to strip us of our innocence. Garden of Eden myth, feeling naked, original sin. So that way we believe, oh, you have to report to a priest to get to God. There's a massive power steal as well, manipulation, controlling. Let's keep them serfs and we'll keep ourselves at the top of the food chain. We don't need a middleman. Our middleman should be our role models, the souls that inspire us, which is certainly going to be few and far between if you are a man. But that's why we have to focus in on that. We don't have to grade everybody else's bullshit. There's too much of it. Just let it take care of itself and fade out, while we focus on what a human actually is, the actual human needs to create a future world that can actually be a humanitarian, improved society, instead of choosing to go backwards into this 2D medieval, everyone being afraid and then going absolutely fucking insane. I reject that reality wholeheartedly. It will not be entering my space. I will make absolutely sure of that. Everything in my community and how I do this work is not about conforming to how other people are doing it, how you're supposed to run your business. The structure is built upon the missing and needed medicines that our humanity needs. We need flexibility, we need grace, we need to prioritize emotions so that way we can move organically and not just have to be a machine. Because when you get moved into 2D, that's all there is. It's just a machine. But if we evolve into a much more complex and organic understanding of what it means to be a human, we can get to high octave Virgo, which is, these are the cards I had dealt, including the traumas, including the pathologies, including these past experiences where I've not all been perfect. And I've learned by taking the hard path again and again and again, has allowed me to hone in on discovering my usefulness as a servant to this world and this collective. When we discover that function, like how lungs have lung function, liver has liver function, when we discover that authentic service created from what we're born as, divine children of God, but we're not all the same. There's flute players, there's trumpet players, and we're just simply learning to let loose on our personal expression, to come back into what it means to be alive and what it means to be directed from the inside out, from our soul, our heart, our empathy, our compassion, our care. That's what we build upon as the basement level. So when we discover our authentic self, when we become truly self-realized, when we become individuated, we know our part, we know our piece. We don't pretend to have infinite arms to do all things at once. Virgo is focusing on the small step at a time to offer this service back to the collective. And that is where, like lungs have lung function and liver has liver function, when we simply get into that service and maybe we start whistling while we work, or we get into a meditative trance, like how Ram Dass said, your path to God could be knitting. That can be your meditation. That's what tunes us into the cohesiveness of the whole. Then the lung is not just aware of the in-out, it knows that it's a part of a collective body that's connected to all these different things, can receive information from these different parts and pieces, and be filled by a sense of purpose, by being connected to something bigger than ourself. When we find and honor this right relationship between soul and God, we become like a lightning rod charged with energy. It's no longer work. It's a celebration of what we were born to be and do. Let's not conform to the 2D bullshit. Keep your eyes like a hawk eye on the prize. There's nowhere forward but here. Do the work that only you can do, and we'll find ourselves on the other end soon enough. Follow your heart and your gut, like I'm being called in the middle of nowhere sometimes. And there's a lot of transition, I know, going on for lots of people, and we don't know necessarily where it's going. We need courage, we need heart to carve that path out. Then we start to contribute our service. Maybe it is clearing the space to build a school or to build a community in that looking forward without looking back type of way. We're going to create a new meeting point where people can meet us in our soul's desire. There's going to be a whole group of people helping us to build this village community school before we even realize that they are there. So become self-realized, join my school, do the greatest shadow work that is available to humans at this time, and see how potent and powerful we all end up being once we come out on the other side of the mill. And my friends, sometimes the only way out is through. And again, this is a rocket ship, like Willy Wonka's Great Glass Elevator, both going up and out. And this elevator is going to introduce new dimensional possibilities. It's no longer just 2D up and down. Willy Wonka's elevator can go turn-wise, can go diagonal-wise, can go flip-wise, etc., etc., etc. I'm excited for us all. Please keep in touch. Until next time, much, much love to you and your beloveds. As always, please take care.